Joining us today. Man has covered the league for a long time. He's got a lot of different things. Pro football guru, fan-sided. I'm sure you can go on Twitter. You'll find a bunch more. Russell Baxter is here. Russell, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Doing pretty good. I have to say, I think this playoff matchup is very interesting here with the Super Bowl matchup here between the Bengals and the Rams. If I told you going into the playoffs that was where we're going to end up, what would you have said?
Well, this is a league where nothing is impossible. We see it all the time. We see plenty of last to first. You know, the Philadelphia Eagles were a last place team in 2016. In 2017, they won the Super Bowl. Okay? We had three teams in the league this year that finished last that made the playoffs. Philadelphia, Cincinnati, and San Francisco. We had seven teams that made the playoffs last year, didn't make them this year. So you see this where a team gets hot and pushes the right buttons later in the year. To me, this is not all that different from what we saw from the Tennessee Titans 2 years ago in 2019.
Yeah, certainly true. And now we have the Bengals back in the big game for the first time since 1989, and they go through the playoffs here. They win at home against the Raiders. They go on the road, upset the Titans and the Chiefs. What have you noticed about Cincinnati going through those three playoff games?
Well, first off, when they beat Tennessee, it's the first time they won a road playoff game in the history of the franchise. And they enjoyed it so much then that they went to Kansas City and pulled off an even bigger comeback, tied for the biggest comeback in the championship round. You have to go back to 2006 when the Patriots were up at Indianapolis 21-3 and wound up losing, and Peyton Manning and the Colts went to the Super Bowl. And unfortunately, Andy Reid's been involved in a lot of these games, blowing big playoff leads. I sent out a note. There have been 11 postseason games in which a team came back from 18 points or more. Andy Reid's Chiefs have been involved in four of them. Three losing efforts, and then came back and beat the Houston Texans in a play around. So I don't know. He must like his suspense or anything. But Cincinnati has done this by playing complementary football. And I know Joe Burrow's getting a lot of attention, and deservedly so, but his receivers have come up big. And the defense that a lot of people don't necessarily talk about, they went out during free agency and got a guy named Trey Hendrickson. Okay? He's changed that defense. That team was dead last in the league last year with 17 sacks. During the regular season this year, they had 42.
Yeah, for sure. He has made a big impact here, and I want to circle back on Burrow maybe because obviously this has sort of been his coming out party in the postseason, and when he got drafted, he sort of fell behind. It was the Bengals not good, and Justin Herbert had all the flashy numbers last year, saying he was the best quarterback in this crop, but Joe Burrow sort of shown some guts and some moxie to sort of have these traits that the winning quarterbacks in the league in these big spots seem to have. What have you noticed about Joe Burrow, especially going down the stretch here?
Well, there's an unflappable presence to him. There's a devil-may-care attitude to him, and I think it serves him well. I mean, he's with a franchise that is, they're making their third Super Bowl appearance, first time since 1988. It was a team that it wasn't long ago, earlier, 10 years ago, they were in the playoffs 5 years in a row. Okay, but they couldn't get the job done. And that goes all the way back before Marvin Lewis. I mean, they ended that long playoff drought and so on. But I think the fact that Joe Burrow doesn't necessarily have to put up these mind-boggling numbers, but he has at times, for them to win football games. And that's what you're looking for. You're not looking for a quarterback that the team is solely dependent on. Okay? You want a balanced effort from this team. Joe Mix has been terrific. Obviously, Jamar Chase, guy after the catch, it's unbelievable. But, T. Higgins and, even though the offensive line gave up 9 sacks against Tennessee, he still came out hurling and so on. So I like the way Zach Taylor has called the game. I like the way their defense has responded throughout the postseason. And at times they look terrible, but it's kind of been the up and down nature of this league all year. Teams go on winning streaks, then they go on losing streaks. But Cincinnati, put everything together. They beat the Chiefs in week 17 at Cincinnati. They basically took the week off in week 18, and yet they came out here and have notched 3 straight playoff wins. And I think you have to give credit to everyone involved. And that, again, is what you need. You don't need these asterisk. I've thrown out this stat for years. It's now 56 years that a quarterback led the league in passing, and none of those 56 quarterbacks, or the 56 times, has the team gone on to win the Super Bowl. You might win your fantasy league, by the way, Mike.
Yeah, I didn't do that this year either, unfortunately, but I want to focus on the game a little bit more. I go to the Rams side here because the Rams really had a roller coaster of a playoff run because they blow out the Cardinals the first round. They nearly blow the big lead to the Bucs last week, find a way to win that one. And then this week, they play very bad the first half. Look at they trying to give the game to the 49ers, end up coming back to win and go to the Super Bowl in their own building. So what do you think about the Rams playoff run here?
Well, I think the most significant thing is, they had lost to the 49ers 6 times in a row, and then they're down by 10. And they showed a lot of resiliency coming back. They scored the final 13 points of the game, where I think a lot of people might have thought that, oh, wow, the Niners just have their number. They're more physical than the Rams. But then Los Angeles got those stops. And then, Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford were great during the regular season. It's not quite Larry Fitzgerald from 2008, Mike, but Cooper Kupp is having quite the postseason. And, he scored at least 1 touchdown in each of the playoff games, well over 100 yards receiving the last 2 playoff games. The huge catches against Tampa Bay. Again, not Larry Fitzgerald, go back, you can look it up, in 2008, when the Cardinals got to the Super Bowl, he had an amazing 4-game stretch. Cooper Kupp's had a pretty decent 3-game stretch. And that's a plus they have playmakers on it's funny, the Rams have a quarterback that's never been to the Super Bowl, but they have a Super Bowl MVP on their roster in the form of Von Miller.
Yes, Von Miller, Aaron Donald, a lot of guys in that defense here. You mentioned Stafford has not gone to the Super Bowl, and obviously a big part of that was playing all those years in Detroit, where he went to a couple of playoff games, never won any, sort of regarded as he's a guy who was a top pick, puts up big stats, doesn't win. Do you think now that he's gotten the Rams Super Bowl that more fans are going to appreciate how good Matthew Stafford actually is?
Well, I think he's in a situation now where it's more of a complete team. I think Matthew Stafford has always been a guy who's been more passer than quarterback. Okay. He's got the big arm. Early in his career, he couldn't stay healthy. Then he could stay healthy. But the organization that he was with, they haven't won a playoff game in 30 years, in 1991. They're the only franchise in the NFC has never been to the Super Bowl. They're one of only 4 franchises that haven't been to the Super Bowl. So I think he did his best. He showed a lot of resiliency around him, but, he wanted to move on. And I understood it, and the Rams gave up a lot to get him. But let's be honest. He's also had some of his lapses this year as well. They had a little bit of a slide in the second half of the season. He was throwing his share of pick sixes and so on. But again, when you build a complete team that is not dependent on one person, you can have a bad game and still win the game. And you see all these great individual performances around the league, especially at quarterback, and frankly, they're home right now.
Yeah, that's true. And I feel like the star power is going to be the headline of this game on both sides. I feel like, to me, the most important part of this game is going to be, I'm sure you know as a football guy, that the battle of the trenches is going to decide this football game. And the way I look at it, it seems like the Rams have a clear edge on both lines compared to the Bengals here. So what do you think about how the battle of the trenches impacts this contest?
Well, I will say this. I think the Bengals defensive line is very underrated. They don't have an Aaron Donald, but they have Hendrickson and Hubbard and DJ Reader up the middle, who they gave big money to a couple of years ago to stop the run. And the Bengals were 5th in run defense this year. A year ago they were 29th. That's a big turnaround. And again, we've seen them. They got blown out kind of by Cincinnati. They got beat by the Jets earlier this year, but it's that ability to bounce back and not let things spiral out of control. Look at Arizona. Once Arizona lost, they had their issues. And that's part of coaching and that's part of mindset and so on. So again, the Bengals deserve credit. Offensive line, I don't think there's any question. And by the way, one guy who's probably going to be interviewed as much as anybody during Super Bowl week. Matthew Stafford will be one. Joe Burrow will be one. But how about Andrew Whitworth playing against his former team?
Yeah, it's definitely an underrated storyline because he played a long time in Cincinnati. He's one of the oldest players to ever play in the Super Bowl, so he's going to be a huge part of this game.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I know, he's been banged up down the stretch here and so on. But, first off, you never know how long you're actually going to play. He was with that franchise for an awfully long time, and they couldn't get over the hump and so on. And again, they had 5 straight years where they were in the playoffs. Andy Dalton was the primary quarterback. A.J. McCarron wound up starting a playoff game for them because he was hurt and so on. But this is a franchise that's never had this success. I mean, the Rams are the only NFL team to win NFL titles in 3 different cities. They were the Cleveland Rams, they were the St. Louis Rams, and they were the Los Angeles Rams. Okay, they were the second stint with Los Angeles. The Bengals came into football in 1968, and they haven't had that success, even though they've been to 2 Super Bowls. They were probably, I will say this, Mike, they were probably happy they didn't see the 49ers again. They haven't had much luck with the Niners in the Super Bowl.
Oh, that's for sure. And I think the key for Cincinnati, obviously, has been throughout the playoffs and all that is the weapons they gave Joe Burrow in the passing attack. The trio of Jamar Chase, Tyler Boyd, and T. Higgins is going to be a big matchup problem on the outside. And the Rams do have some star power in the secondary. Like, how would you think they're going to attack the Bengal passing game, try to slow it down?
Well, I mean, listen, they're going to throw a lot of stuff at them and so on. When you give up 9 sacks in a game at any one time, you obviously have some offensive line issues and so on. And Cincinnati is going to have to counter that with giving the ball to Joe Mixon a lot. Not only as a runner, but probably, dump off and screens and so on. And remember when they really kind of got back in the game at Kansas City on a screen to Perrine. Which wound up being a touchdown and so on. So, the Bengals wide receiving core, and Tyler Boyd is very, very underrated and so on. And understandably so, Jamar Chase having a, unbelievable year as a rookie and so on. But, Buffalo Bills fans will remember Tyler Boyd basically putting the Bills in the playoffs a couple of years ago when the Bengals beat Baltimore at Baltimore in the final game of the season.
Yeah, that's for sure. And I think another thing that's interesting to watch here is the fact that the second year in a row now, after 54 years without having this happen, they have the home team in their own stadium for the Super Bowl. And the Rams obviously have more of a home field feel because they got a full crowd in SoFi this year to about 25% in Tampa last year. So I know the Super Bowl fan's not the same, but what kind of factors do you think having this home field will be for the Rams?
Well, it'll just depend on, who's your... I don't know how much of an impact it'll have because from all reports, the 49ers had an awful lot of fans at the game last week. So, I mean, I've yet to see a fan catch a touchdown pass or make a tackle. Okay. But, just comfortability as far as not having to travel and so on, where, Cincinnati is obviously having to travel to the game and so on. So, I don't know if the crowd, but it is such an oddity to me. Again, you go 54 years and then all of a sudden, back-to-back years where the team is playing in its home stadium and so on. So do you imagine if it was the Chargers and the Rams? I mean, it killed 2 birds with one stone. It happened once in 55 years. It happened twice in the same year.
Yeah, that would have been pretty crazy. And I mean, the Cardinals have to be hoping this trend continues next year when they host the Super Bowl in Glendale.
Well, the way the Cardinals have gone under Cliff Kingsbury, unfortunately, they have to learn to close out a season. They didn't, they got off to a somewhat start his rookie year, but people forget in 2020 they were 6-3 and then lost 5 of their last 7 and finished 8-8. This was a 7-0 team last year in Arizona. They wound up finishing 11-6, technically 11-7, and got blown out in the playoff game against the Rams.
Yeah, absolutely. And you tend to have a habit, I love following you on Twitter for this, is that you always have a good eye of identifying who these X factors are in this game. We're not really talking about right now, but end up having a huge role in the outcome of the Super Bowl. So who is somebody you're looking at right now saying this person is not being discussed enough, but they could really impact the game?
Well, I think I already alluded to it, Mike, and it's Tyler Boyd. And last week against the Chiefs, we saw, Jamar Chase is Jamar Chase. And remember, he had 266. and 3 touchdowns against the Chiefs. Who was the 100-yard receiver against the Chiefs on Sunday? It was T. Higgins. Okay? So he came out of, and again, they're so deep there. When you try to take one guy away or 2 guys away, someone else is going to burn you. So to me, again, Tyler Boyd, with this team for a number of years, seeing the lean times and so on. But that game in 2017 against Baltimore always stood out to me. And, after a kind of a sluggish, slow start to his career as he began to develop. Remember, for years there, A.J. Green was in the Pro Bowl every year. So I'm going to keep an eye on A.J. Boyd and him finding the cracks if the Rams secondary concentrate too much on the speedsters.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's do real quick before you go. I know it's way too early to sort of predict the game, but let's give you a keys to victory here. So, what is the key here for the Bengals to win their first Super Bowl?
Well, obviously avoid mistakes. You go back and look at Super Bowl history, and avoiding turnovers is huge. Okay, you'll see the number out there and so on. I want to say somewhere in the neighborhood of the 55 Super Bowls, the turnover differential combined, I think, is like plus 100. Okay, there's a lot of teams that have won Super Bowls and not commit turnovers in the game. You have to go back and you could probably count on your finger how many times the losing team wound up not committing turnovers and still wasn't able to win the game. So it's just very interesting of all the numbers and so on. Protecting Joe Burrow is obviously important, but keeping that Rams offense off the field, that quick strike ability. Who's going to be the guy who keeps an eye on Cooper Kupp, who, like I said, is having a dynamite postseason and had a dynamite regular season. So as far as the Rams and keys to victory, again, turnovers is always important and so on, but I think what they need to do with Matthew Stafford is give him more balance. Okay. Now I don't know what Cam Akers is going to do. Sony Michel knows a little something about playing in the Super Bowl. Okay. Their offensive line, if Whitworth is back, this could be a game where people were expecting a high-flying shootout, and it turns out to be a ball control game. Let me also remind people one other thing, Mike. For all the offense that we have seen in this league, 2 of the last 3 Super Bowls has featured a team that did not score a touchdown.
Yeah, it's a great point. You had the Rams a couple of years ago against the Patriots, and you had the Chiefs last year who couldn't do anything against Tampa's pass rush.
Right. So all these points you're expecting and so on. And listen, the Chiefs last year didn't have their starting tackles, Mitchell Schwartz and Eric Fisher. I understand all that, but they were sloppy with the ball. They were sloppy with penalties and so on. The thing that's always been interesting, I would say, in recent Super Bowls, Mike, is there doesn't seem to be a lot of scoring in the first half. Okay, especially in the first quarter. And for the teams that haven't been there in a while or not at all, like Cincinnati, there's certainly a degree of nerves. But don't shut off the TV in the fourth quarter, because we have seen our share of fourth quarter heroics in, I would say, the last 10, 15 Super Bowls.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the last thing I want to mention before you go, I think it's an interesting point here, is something I brought up at the top here. Sean McVay is sort of an impact Super Bowl for him, because everybody's regarding him as the whiz kid, the future of the league. Coaching staff's littered with Sean McVay disciples. He's already lost a Super Bowl. He made some very, very curious calls in the NFC Championship game, and he got lucky that he managed to survive no timeouts and 10 minutes left in the fourth quarter on. I feel like if they lose this game, there's going to be a lot more questioning on McVay, saying, how good is he really as a coach?
Well, I will say this. I want to say both coaches in the NFC title game made their share of kind of bizarre moves and so on. And I know they know each other well, but it was almost like they were outthinking themselves when facing each other and so on. But no, your point is again, we just mentioned the Super Bowl in which they did not score a touchdown. They got 3 points after, I want to say they scored like 528 points during the regular season that year. So, again, it's somewhat of a different cast. And in 3 years in today's NFL, it does make a big difference. I don't think if they wind up losing, I don't think the critics will be too tough on them and so on. I think it'll just depend on the way they play. That's a lot of times, to me, the criticism comes more watching their performance than not necessarily watching the result.
Yeah, it certainly makes some sense. Be a fun game on Sunday. Russell, thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it. Before I let you go, how can people follow social media to keep up with all your NFL coverage?
You can follow me on Twitter at Bax Football Guru. Pro Football Guru is on Facebook and Instagram. I collaborate with my partner, Julie Boy. Jules Loves Blue. She's on Twitter, as is PFG Vibe, where we do our pieces for full press coverage. So you can find us in a lot of different places. And on February 13th, you can find me in my living room watching the game.
That sounds good, Russell. Thanks for all the time. Really appreciate it.
You got it.